Yeah, welcome very much to Conversations. It's a special program that we're showing today. It's a program that was originally taped in 1974, mid-1974, with the eminent polymath philosopher Buckminster Fuller, conducted by myself. We just had it sent to us through the good offices of David Schulman and Charles Fernandez. And as I say, it goes back to 1974 with Dr. Fuller talking about his general philosophy, and we're very happy to be able to present that to you. It's a little old and so forth, and hope you might enjoy it. I just want to mention that he had the idea of anticipatory design science. He was always a comprehensivist who thought about, rather than thinking directly political to address the problems of the world, is to come up with design in order to create in the world, through good design, a world that makes possible the good of humanity to come out, rather than trying to exorcise them to be good in some sort of a more traditional sense. A major voice in my thinking, perhaps the most important polymath or comprehensive thinker in the history of mankind. I'm very happy that we've had this tape revived. We had lost track of it, and we got it back recently, and it's about 55 minutes of a program with Dr. Fuller. Hope you might enjoy it. I just want to get one quick plug in for a book now, Massive Change by Bruce Mao. And this is a book that's out in the stores now, and it's got reference to Fuller, Carbon 60 and that kind of thing, and other people at the design level, Hazel Henderson and others. And this is not political, it's at a design level. So I hope you might enjoy that program again from 1974 with the eminent comprehensive anticipatory design scientist Buckminster Fuller. Thank you. Enjoy the program. Very Honorable Dr. R. Buckminster Fuller. Dr. Fuller, I'd like to welcome you very, very much to Conversations, and thank you for coming here to the program.
May I thank you for your greeting and the welcome, but also let you know that I'm quite confident that if I'm any significance or use at all, is because I am really a demonstration of what an average healthy human being really does have in the way of faculties and resources, that when the individual makes up his mind really to go along with whatever the truth and the challenges may be, and not try to solve things in the terms of what the going game of money or politics may be.
Yes, right. Well, you have set out consciously to comprehensively take the measure, or to understand the working of nature, and in keeping with nature's pattern, to understand the evolution of consciousness and the ability for man to appropriately bring design or bring life supportive capability in keeping with nature's design, discovering that to the maximal benefit of the human family in a comprehensive mode, which has been quite unique, and at this particular moment in the evolution of consciousness is extremely valuable and very important. And I would personally like to thank you very, very much for the activities I know that you've been engaged in for over 50 years in a particularly interesting manner, gauging the evolution of consciousness and our ability to participate.
But again, I'd just like to emphasize that I think that I'm only a manifest of what evolution is up to. There has to be an X and there has to be a Y character that does such and such, and that I, by good fortune, happen to be in the sort of a frontier position.
Yes.
Really in the frontier position, because I, in a sense, was almost had been thrown out of the regular patterns. I seemed to be unwanted, so that really was an exile. And simply with the enormous perspective that an exile has of looking things over as a whole, I was able to realize that humanity had arrived at some point of transformation, as a great threshold crossing. That is, in view of the fact that all humans were born naked, absolutely helpless, ignorant, we obviously had to find our way, and we had to find our way by trial and error, gradually to discover that we have mind, that mind can discover principles, and that principles themselves are something that cannot be apprehended just by brains of any other creature, that because brains are always and only coordinating the information input from the touching, the smelling, the hearing, the seeing, and making up packages out of those inputs. But mind discovers relationships existing between special case packages that are not in the data of any of the special case by themselves. To make it very simple,
Yes.
Isaac Newton's discovering of gravitational behavior. There was nothing in the geometry, the chemistry, electromagnetics of Earth that said it was going to attract another body, non-contiguous and thousands of miles away, nor there was anything in the moon that said it was going to. That there was then such an attraction occurring, and that this interrelationship varied exponentially as the second power of the relative proximity. If you have the distance between the two, the interaction is fourfolded or doubled away, reduced 1/4 of what it was. There was nothing in either body by itself that said there was going to be such an interaction, certainly not saying it was going to vary and vary exponentially. All the great discoveries of science have been then these interrelationships that are not in any of the data of any of the special case. And that's all the brain can ever deal with, is always with the special case information. So that these principles discovered by mind turn out then to be principles. And a principle has no inherent beginning and end, and they do not get accredited by science as a scientific principle if there's ever an exception found. So they are, by definition, inherently eternal. Now, everything the brain deals in is terminal, finite. So that we have mind and mind alone, which human beings have, that no other phenomenon we know in the universe has, which has some access to some eternal principles operating in the universe. And we find these eternal principles themselves, none of them have ever been found to contradict another. Not only do they not contradict one another, but they're all inter-accommodative. That is, they're all being eternal, or all concurrently operative. They do not interfere with them. Some of them then augment one another at exponential rates. When you get a complex of clearly differentiated behaviors that all interaccommodate one another, this would be called a design. That's what we mean by a design, in contrast to their being disorderly and interfering with one another. So the human mind has apparently gradually been pulling the curtain aside and discovering some of the great design of the universe itself. That we on board of our planet, tiny as we are, our planet couldn't be smaller, tiny little, to you and I big, but to in the astronomical figures, 1/100th of the diameter of the sun, and the sun is a rather small star. It's one of 100 billion stars in our galaxy. We now know of 1 billion such galaxies. When we get into distances and magnitudes here, where our little planet could not be more negligible, and you and I are invisible on our planet, therefore the little human beings on board of that planet, invisible, negligible in the size of the universe, have the capability to discover a principle by virtue of which we've discovered the principle of optics and refraction of light. Therefore we could make a telescope, and make that telescope, we've been able to discover all those galaxies, which 99.9% of all those stars are not directly visible to your eye and my eye, so that our minds have the capability to be able to really check up satisfactorily that in a 22 billion light-year diameter sweep out of observation, we know that there are those galaxies, and by our mind discovering principles by virtue of which we find each of the chemical elements has unique way of making waves. Each one has unique wave patterns. And with the spectroscope, we're able then to take all that light from all those stars that are not visible to us, and on board of our planet, little human beings have actually taken an inventory of the relative abundance of all the chemical elements in our universe. Now that you and I on board of our planet would have this kind of capability. I said I came at a moment when I began to be absolutely astonished by being exiled by society in a sense. I saw that little human beings were terribly preoccupied with the games of finding out what is so, and having with enormous ignorance of yesterday, feeling that you're made hungry. You don't make yourself hungry. It's hard, quite a piece of design that we are, and people have not found seemingly enough to eat and not enough. So they've been thinking the world was a game of a negative, where man is supposed to be a failure and had to prove himself an exception to live. And I could see that the principles really operating on the universe indicated very, very popularly that he was here for a very important function, and he had to discover his mind. And realizing about the time that I'm in this kind of awareness that we had to invent a lot of words to describe our view, our communicate as you and I are sitting here doing. The Oxford Dictionary, latest edition, had about 100,000 words, indicating that little human beings in their trial and error have discovered over 100,000 nuances of information that were so different that they really needed their own word. And that they have been able to agree on 100,000 words, knowing how difficult it is for human beings to come to an agreement that would read 100,000 words, again seemed to be an incredible victory. That I felt then that here I was coming into a picture of man on board of our planet after millions of years, having this beautiful vocabulary so you and I can communicate these experiences, that out of those experiences we can discover principles, and we're here to employ those principles quite clearly in a universe where we have importings and exportings. All the stars are exporting energy, giving it off in enormous ways. However, we also discover as of this century that apparently no energy is either created or lost, so therefore the universe is eternally regenerative. It's the only and the minimum perpetual motion invention. And to have such an extraordinary invention with all the permitted 92 chemical element behaviors and all the different frequencies associating, all the intertransformings that can go on, and always going on, never ceaselessly, and yet it's to have such an integrity that nothing gets lost. It would very clearly then, the exporting means that there must be importing places. And but these stars are all visible to you and I because the energy they give off exporting. We would not be able to identify an importing center off in space because it wouldn't give off anything to be identified by, unless we happen to bounce a signal off it. But it takes so many minutes if you ought to get there and coming back, we're not really able to do much about it. But our own planet, we discover, is a place where the energies of the universe are being collected, where the sun radiation being pounded by the vegetations and the algae, and converted by photosynthesis, beautiful orderly molecular structure, making hydrocarbons out of disorderly receipts. Therefore, this quite clearly is a place where the biologicals are taking the energies, sorting them out, turning them into orderly structure, and burying them ever more deeply, we call the fossil fuels. And we have, amongst all the biologicals, only the vegetation can do the impounding of the sun radiation. The mammals, such as you and I, have to then eat the vegetables or the algae or one of the fish that have grown from one of the other animals. And so I find then that we have the human beings, amongst all the biologicals, has the most extraordinary sorting capability, which is that of the mind, which in principle then can do that. So I'd say, if you invent a very complex machine such as the Boeing 747, you have to have a whole lot of instruments. Those instruments are telling you about all the stresses, strains, heats, and relative pressures, and then you once in a while discover something on those information that says, in fact, the lack of information says the pilot's got to take over from automatic, and only by virtue of his access to the principle of the universe could he possibly save the ship. I say then, in designing a much more complex thing, which would be the eternally regenerative universe, you would have to have some local sensing mechanisms that are able then to take very sensitive readings and then to solve problems by virtue of that access to the principle of the universe. Apparently, human beings have then what one might call a local and universe monitoring function of the problem solving. And I say, what is common to all lives in all history? Problems, problems, problems. We're here for that. And when we play games such as baseball, you knock something out and it's disorderly. Then how do you convert it to order as quick as possible in the first place, wherever you throw it? So that our game on our planet is problem solving. So anyway, Now, the point was that I found myself an outsider,
Yeah.
and because I was an outsider, then I tended to look at the total information rather than the strong. So I realized that we might be crossing this threshold where instead of just it had to be you or me in a battle of power and might, see who's going to live and who's going to die, it might be that the principle would make it possible to make everybody successful.
The latter, the former,
but yet we didn't know about those principles earlier.
the former being on the idea of scarcity,
Right.
that there was a condition of scarcity and that we would be coming to a moment of a realization of a surplus capability that had been introduced through our metaphysical, intellectual
if we really use the
capability.
resources in an intelligent way, always in principle and not just for me.
Yeah.
If then instead of hoarding for me, for my survival,
Yes,
we really looked into the synergy, which is the
Yeah.
principle operating between systems I spoke
Yes.
about, that the mind and the mind alone
Yes.
can discover, where we discover these are behaviors of whole systems unpredicted by the behaviors of the past,
Right,
like the
resonating.
gravity of the moon and Earth. So I said, I can see that only if we really begin to operate together and employ those principles, could we really possibly make man a success. And I began to look into that matter and saw that we didn't know how to fly and do a lot of these things very well, but we were assuming that there's not enough ground, so we were doing only a tackling science for war, or how are you going to kill, to see which one is going to survive.
It's true. That's been the history of the human condition, has been a condition of scarcity.
Right.
And it's you who has postulated I remember take particular reference to the article that was in the Life magazine in 1952, postulating a transference from the condition of scarcity, which had been characteristic of the human condition, to 1952, having arrived at, 43% coefficient between haviness and the world's population, and you're projecting a 20-odd year period to just about the time that we find ourselves in now, mid-1974, to when the planet would cross the 50% mark, and there would be a new kind of condition begin to be relevant to the assigning of our planetary design priorities. And it would seem to me that you had been gauging that with such an incredibly accurate kind of ability that was, in a sense, quite unique. I don't think there are too many people now who have a fundamental sense that we may be on the dawn of a new capability to realize surplus is the basic underlying assumption for assigning design.
Out to you where I saw that I saw a man who knew exactly what that airplane weighed and what he was getting out of it. He knew just what the ship of the sea weighed. But he doesn't think about buildings in terms of weight. He thinks of them sort of as fortresses.
Yes.
The bigger and heavier and higher, the more secure. I saw then, because he was putting his science only on the airplane and so forth as a weapon, did he do that. But he assumed that man wasn't going to be successful, so there's no use in spending our wealth on the people because they're going to be flop anyway.
Malthusian
so that
kind of.
I saw that if we really turned it on what I call livingry,
Yes.
I needed a term like weaponry,
Yes.
livingry, then what you mean environment controls, shells, the apparatus inside to clean us and prepare food, and conserve, and handle the energies. I then went into that, and that brought about the discovery of the geodesic domes and so forth, and now over 100,000 around the world.
Yes.
And I now really know that I can give you, for instance, 30 buildings for one, for a given snow load, hurricane loading, earthquake loading, for a given clear span. I can give you 30 buildings for one against an alternate known engineering strategy than spherical, triangulated tensegrity structures.
Yes.
So that I now know by actual measurement of what technology you do need to make man a success. I now know it's highly feasible. We have the resources, we have the knowledge. The metals have not been lost in mind. They simply come out and get melted out to take one Cadillac, melt it up, and get out two Japanese cars, twice as good. So that what we keep circulating, I now know with the resources we already mined, the knowledge we already have, is highly feasible to take care of all of humanity at a higher standard living than anybody's ever known. And it can be done by 1985. In fact, in this very room that we're in here today, we're just going over the last World Game workshop, which has been going on for the last month, and the team really did undertake to absolutely certify all those figures I just gave you. And we now know actually the critical path of how we phase out the fossil fuels burning, how we phase out the nuclear, how we do bring in the wind power, how we do bring in the hydrogen powers and so forth, and it actually can be done by 1985. I knew that because I'd made the measurements before. Now I have really a large team have been able to certify this. So is going to become a public matter fairly rapidly. But again, please note that I only was able to do what I did because it was of the times.
Yes.
Things had to be ripe.
That's right.
Nature has a gestation rate.
That's right.
And I'm really very eager that never appear that I think I'm something fancy that is something. I simply, really by very good luck, happen to be that exile at that moment to take inventory, having fortunately had enough experience in ships and airplanes and building of buildings and so forth, to realize it was so.
One of the principles I think that would make it possible for us to realize through design, as opposed to some sort of a political expedient use of the old technologies, would be the principle of ephemeralization, or constantly through design being able to do more with less. And you mentioned your, of course, famous geodesic structures, which is the most efficient means of enclosing space. That's an example of doing more with less. And this means that we're becoming more productive through the utilization of miniaturization, and smaller technological instruments are creating more and more capability in terms of providing life support.
Everybody's really familiar with that in electronics, the great big radio set down to the little transistor and so forth. Where today, I like to use the example, one communication satellite weighing 1/4 of a ton is outperforming the transoceanic communication capability of 175,000 tons of copper cable.
That's right.
Now, that's the rate of gain of the more with less thing is not just one Cadillac into two Japanese, but very exponential rate.
An exponential capability. And it just makes one wonder sometimes whether or not a planetary systems or planetary political, economic, and political social organizing assumptions, which had all been geared to a condition of scarcity as the condition in which the evolution of consciousness or the human drama had been transpiring until perhaps this moment. The transition is such a fundamental kind of one-time, unprecedented fundamental transformation that we're experiencing now, that it does bring with it certain concomitant difficulties on the part of people who have had their identities and their senses of purpose and so forth constrained to the old organizing assumptions. So it's a question of somehow being able to, in a sense, raise consciousness, or perhaps a process of mutual educational process to the real realities, which is the principal task by which the general citizenry may be able to get a sense of the quite optimistic, realistically optimistic condition that Spaceship Earth is at this moment, and perhaps beyond the kind of negative feelings that are accompanying the unoptimal production capability of the old systems in which they have found themselves. So a process of participatory education, or world game on large scale, is perhaps the principal challenge, or the interesting challenge that's before us now. I would like to think that your perceptions most certainly are absolutely crucial to the means by which we can begin to have that information structured within a technological context, which can provide for a mass kind of participation in that. I'd like to speak about that a little bit later, but is that approximately the condition in which you see
I would
us now?
like to be sure that we recognize and to whatever extent we are disseminating information, that how reasonable it is that yesterday man being ignorant and being very hungry and not knowing even what he could eat, just a berry picker find this poisons him and so forth, that it has been a logical working assumption that there's nowhere nearly enough to go around, because when people did find a lucky place, then they got a flood came and a drought, one of those things, and they tried to invade. So man has always been warring and coming on.
It's a nightmare.
So we do have absolutely universal to economics and to political economics is the model that there's fundamental inadequacy, fundamental scarcity. Therefore, all politics are based on the fact that there's not enough to go around. Someday a whole lot of people are going to die. And I have a theory, and my theory is the fairest, I think, and the wisest and the most economical. Therefore, you better join up with me, and your family better join up with me. That's why I have a politician. Now, realize then you're going to have a showdown to see, the result of seeing me may be enough for you, and so we join up sides, and then we're going to have the great Armageddon, see which of the great world sides are going to win, the communists or the capitalists, what it may be. It's not that way. having discovered there really is enough to go around, I then find then that politics are really now obsolete. People are so used to the idea, I got to have a leader.
Yes.
They also had to have a leader when we were illiterate. We didn't have words. We didn't have the communication. We didn't have the information.
Right.
Suddenly, everybody, once there was just the pharaoh was in on the information, then the nobles were, then the middle class. Just in this century, everybody's suddenly in on the information. Everybody's in on the vocabulary. Everybody can communicate. So suddenly, it is really going to be everybody, and everybody's going to have to know in a hurry that there really is enough to go around. Now, if there is enough to go around, and you and I know there is, you and I don't need a politician to tell us how to make sense as we sit here. He doesn't have to, politician tell you, now it's your turn to speak. You and I cooperate and try to bring out the information in a logical way.
Yes.
And society just does not lead that. Anyway, we're not used to that. We're used to the idea not to go around, so we elect you, and it's up to you to be sure that our side comes out on top. Now, and that's where all the flag waving and all the guns and everything are out there. But it's just no longer, it's actually no longer so. Now this is what, it's very, we're up against either a bloody revolution ahead, thinking it has to be you and me, with all the bombing capability, $200 billion a year being spent to get ready for Armageddon by the leading nations of the earth. I say we're going to have either a revolution of blood where everybody loses then, or it's going to be a design revolution where we do use the ephemeralization, we do more than less, we do get all of humanity successful by 1985. It's a very touch and go matter. Therefore, to me, I take very deep sense of responsibility that you and I are invited to be on the air to communicate with a number of people. Therefore, I say the most important thing is how do we get all of humanity to find out what it is all about in the shortest possible time that man does have the option to make it. He didn't know it, but now he has.
And we're at a very crucial moment now, and it's a very, very crucial, and it's a privilege to be alive, conscious, and able to participate at this particular time in the scenario of the evolution of universal consciousness. But as we say, as we refer to the old systems by which the planet's been operating, and we can have a sense of a new capability that's gleaned or able to be realized through mind's ability to perceive this, it's possible to conceive also that the great numbers of the general citizenry of the United States, who perhaps might be viewing this particular program through an extended cable vision system linked through satellite capability, it might be difficult for them to realize that if their identities are, or their immediate securities are, wrapped up in the premises of the old organizing assumptions, the political structure of which they are a part, it might be that in a certain measure that system that people have been living by must be addressed by the new conscious, the old reality in a sense must be dealt with, and in a sense, I have a feeling that it would have to be dealt with in a way we can ignore the old patterns by which we've been operating, or that we bring a process by which those in them will realize that they are able to participate and are part of this as well. Because if we're having a fundamental change, and if we have a condition from a historical condition and a dialectical pattern whereby a new system wiped out the old system that had been established, then those people in positions of responsibility for the old organizing assumptions, the political leadership, or whatever kind of position of leadership, fear the kind of change which is feeling abroad in the land, and that perhaps for the first time in the evolution of consciousness we have the opportunity by where, through a process of a conscious understanding on their part, of a transference from the condition of scarcity to surplus, that the fundamental change can happen in a mode where nobody loses, including those who've been responsible for the old way of doing things.
So,
that in a sense we get to those
our responsibility is to enlighten, elucidate, not ask anybody to believe, but show them why it is so, that there now can be enough, to realize then that as but evolution, however, is at work, and you and I didn't invent that universe. We didn't invent that planet. We didn't invent those laws. There's something much bigger operating. The thing to do is to stand off and try to see what those are. Now, the things that are happening evolutionarily, we have politics everywhere. With the information system we have today, are becoming quite clearly highly corruptible. They're perfectly good human beings, but thinking's not enough to go around.
Perhaps in the ground.
Then playing tricks. How do you get well, you don't want to really kill the other man, but
No,
to tell a lie. It's immoral if you do it for yourself, but it's moral if you do it for the people you love, all those kind of ways of temporizing with the truth.
Yeah.
And man has been doing that.
Yeah.
And so poor little man, I see that politicians are now in such a bind.
Mr. Nixon, for instance.
Well, whatever it is, we don't have to say that. It's quite clear that politics are corruptible, that you can't get an office without buying it and all those things.
Yeah, more or less the way the country's set up.
No, but this was always true, you see.
Yes,
but now it's out in the open.
Yeah,
so therefore we have a young world that's becoming disillusioned with the idea that how you get solve a problem is about politics.
Yeah.
They're beginning to really say, how does this universe work? I see if we can get to the moon and not lose a single human being on that kind of an undertaking, and takes billions. That's what we ought to be doing about how do we make our spaceship work.
Yeah, right.
So there's a young world coming through, and I find that absolutely will not put up with lies. It's manifest of its abhorrence of any misrepresentation is most cheering of all the news we have.
That's not a generalized principle in the universe.
And each child is very much better informed than the ones before. Because when I was young, I was 8 years old when the Wright brothers flew, and up to the time, everybody said it's inherently impossible for man to fly.
Right.
I was brought up under an incredible amount of misinformation, a great deal to get rid of. But these young people they're not all found with misinformation. They really learn. They say, I see Daddy and Mom are listening to the radio too. Daddy used to be authority. He brought the news home, but he doesn't bring the news home anymore. They see that Daddy isn't the authority. Therefore, he's also emulating the voice of the people on the TV or the radio. And the kids are saying, I see then that Dad and Mom are not the authority. I love them very much. They love me, but I got to do my own thinking. This is the first generation saying, I'm going to do my own thinking. This is a great change, because if we do survive, it's because man is using his mind, is doing his own thinking, and not leaving it to somebody else.
Yeah, I know. I'm very much taken by the concept of synergy as behavioral systems unpredictable by the sum of its parts. And when I begin to think myself in terms of the means by which we might be able to make the transference consciously, I have the sensing that we must be, let's say, from the young world's position, who would look at the historical condition that has been inherited and the people who've been responsible for operating in systems which were established in the assumption of scarcity and in the general condition of ignorance by the people in those assumptions of scarcity, that there be a careful kind of appropriate to universal mind's functioning, that there be a careful means of including without excluding the elder members of our human family who have been operating within that historical condition, and that we tend not to see in any kind of way, if we can, personalized enemies or a political thing, but that we do see as the common enemy ignorance of the condition of which we've been evolving. So in that sense,
I feel very sad for the
political people are caught within systems that, in a sense, it's not, we should not be too hard on
First place,
people,
if you're vindictive,
you shouldn't be vindictive toward those.
You're trying to revenge and so forth, you're not making any contribution at all.
Right.
You've got to understand. In fact, I really feel very often sick in my heart about the poor politicians who are having the function historically of demonstrating that politics are corrupt.
I think the sooner that they could be
very sad matter.
The sooner they could be got to, I think the sooner they could be understood what it is that is transpiring, I think the sooner we would be able to begin to function in a way that could engage each of the citizenry of the planet, which it seems to me would be a maximal kind of engagement on the part of each of us, is a sort of part of a synergistic pattern by which we might find our place in the universe, so that we really do need to have the participation of everyone within the society in a way that is from inside, that they're part of it. So that would be, it's a tricky thing, and sometimes it's a transference. It's hard for a lot of people to realize, but I think it's essential. So in a sense, the real question is to get to the people, the political, responsible, the industrialists and so forth, with information as to how things can be done differently and why, and with understanding, and then we can all go together. And then that would be, in itself, would be a process of education, or a process of getting the good information to people with economy of language that can, and with the integrity, and the system that respects the integrity and the economy of the language, and a means by which this process of national participation and consciousness raising could take place.
I feel that I'm going to have to interrupt
surely.
because
Right,
I feel
sure.
that we're going to have to, in order for those metals to recirculate. For instance, Japan has no iron mines.
Okay.
They become one of the great industrial countries because the United States put so much armaments in the Pacific. They simply able to melt up those armaments, and there was their mine.
Yeah.
In other words, Japan's economy gets on entirely on recirculating scrap. Now, this is absolutely new. Man used to think of metals as being used up like strawberries, that they simply got eaten up. Not so. They just do not get lost. And so we find every time we recirculate those metals, we have this higher, much more know-how. Therefore, we're able to increase that, doing more with less. Now, I feel then, it's very, the whole idea of separate nations in countries was it had to be you and me.
Yeah, that's a scarcity assumption.
And if it's going to really work, it's going to be, because we have to absolutely become transcendental. But I find all the great corporations have now become transnational, and the great ideologies, but only the people are stuck back where they can be conscripted and taxed and so forth, rather than being able to really get to be world citizens. So we're going to have to see all the sovereignties are going to have to go in the next 10 years, next 12 years, if we're going to make it. And so that's quite a, evolution has quite a schedule of things that are going to become obsolete. And it's going to have to become, the going away of those nations and so forth becomes not something I said done away with because you don't like it, but simply because it becomes irrelevant and just simply obsolete.
Or perhaps the negative aspects of nationalism might be able to, but characteristics that are interestingly local characteristics might be amplified, or at least the ones that... It's interesting, if I may pursue that. You're talking about the activities of the multinational corporations. We have had some programming and activity with people responsible for certain of the multinational corporations, and they have made it clear in their discussion that they are aware of their world-round responsibility. They have a world-round constituency and can begin to move outside of the constraints of the sovereign states, although they're also aware of that historical pattern. But this is an entirely new kind of world-round activity that they're having. And one thing, if I may, that they have indicated, or in some programs similar to this that we've done with them, they have indicated their understanding that the productive process has been in the recent time, and certainly the introduction of a surplus capability is the result of a technologically augmented productive system whereby the labor component to the productive process is steadily, or has been in the modern era, decreasing relative to the productive capability of technological systems introduced through man's metaphysical, intellectual capability into the design, and that it is the instrumentalities of technology which are increasingly producing wealth as opposed to labor. And they have indicated to me their interest in economic systems whereby the citizenry of host countries in which they're operating around the world might begin to have a different kind of relationship to the productive process in the area they're working, rather than strictly as laborers, but that they might have a direct relationship to the technological systems or the technological machinery, so that the wealth generated by that technological capability would accrue to them directly, rather than trying to force them into labor patterns which are redundant and are not necessary, and are no longer necessary by the technological capability. In fact, it might be opposite to the best that the technological system could do, but labor-intensive patterns won't allow it to happen because it's a pattern from the past. I wonder if you could comment on that.
Yes, I feel that I've known such wonderful men like Walter Reuther representing labor. There's no question about you could never have had mass production or mass benefaction advantaging of people if you hadn't have mass distribution. You couldn't have mass distribution if you didn't have mass consumption. You couldn't have consumption if you had mass buying capability. What labor really did, evolutionarily, was to make the broad spectrum of those who could participate. It had that function, but now it has also its fear, the fear of the individuals that the machine could displace them, because we do know how to employ principles by which we can take the cosmic energies and put them on the ends of levers. People do not have to be the machines. They've actually been the machinery. They've been just muscle machines. And evolution is trying to graduate man from that, but in his fear that he's not going to be allowed to eat because he's been told there's not enough to go around, therefore you have to prove yourself an exception, you have to earn the right to live.
Yes.
Now, I simply say, the minute we get over that nonsense, we'll simply say, of course, I now find there is enough to go around, therefore it's simply a question, as when a child is born, you don't say how you're going to earn a living, do you? And we used to say, when you're 6 now, you go to work in the mines. Then we say, no, we're going to go on to school. We look out for the human beings a little longer all the time, and we're going to then, within the same 12 years from now, we're going to say, you're automatically, you're included, and you can live that's exactly everything you need, go anywhere you want, there's adequate to do it. Therefore, we're going to give up all the nonsense of your earning a living and really let the automation get going. But that's what nature's trying to do. And we're blocking it in the same way that the professor on tenure is so afraid of losing his job when what we really need to do is get the information to people. So he's really been trying to monopolize them, get his departments finer and finer and say, you can't learn about that unless you take 2 years of courses to ask a professor a question. That has to go. So fear everywhere is going to have to be dissipated, Hal, as people yield and suddenly find. Now, but above all, I feel that we could not really cope with all this. The information has to be handled. If it hadn't been that, again, evolution produced the computer. Nobody didn't know that.
And the magnetic bubble.
But by virtue of the computer's presence, it is possible to put enormous costing problems in. And you can put a problem in whether, when people say we can't afford it, say, which way do you save the most money by granting all the Medicare and so forth, or are you going to wait till you get into trouble and spend it on a war? The computer is going to make it very clear time and again that we can't afford anything else but to put everybody immediately on the payroll. And obviate this. So by virtue of the computer, I can see there's a young world with its truth and so forth. Maybe, and they are really all learning how to program computers, and we're going to be able to put these problems in, and it's going to become suddenly overnight manifest to the world that this is the only way the world really can work. Down go the sound renters, down go the nonsense about to earn a living. And say, how do we really make the world work?
I wonder, I would like to just pursue that a little bit more, if I may. And even though I saw Dr. Stein, Herbert Stein, who is the economic advisor to the President of the United States, the other day characterized economics as the science of scarcity, which I found very interesting. But I'd like to pursue that. Even as economics, the question of economics and the means by which the people are to be related to the productive process, very, very briefly, that if we were to envision a Keynesian model, that the United States primarily relates to a classical economy, modified classical capitalist system, or a Marxian system, which much of the present world relates to in terms of a political or economic ideology, both of those systems assume that the principal component of the productive process is labor. And there is no mechanism built in for relating the owners relating the general citizenry as owners of the technological instrumentalities themselves. There is one system that I have become aware of. I'm wondering if you have. It's a system of Louis Kelso, who has proposed a proposal for relating directly the citizenry of the nation as owners of the means of production, so that they have a means of gaining income other than a wage system or other than a government bureaucracy creating projection of a tax system of gaining income in order to pay it out, which tends to reinforce the old governmental structure. It relates. I wonder if
we had to reform the old accounting system. That's what I think would happen. But I think now we're going to discover that nobody owns anything,
except perhaps their
own
identity.
I don't know those stars. They're very beautiful. There,
you own your own,
I don't know
your own identity.
We don't really own anything. That we are really part of a very extraordinary regenerative system, and I think it's really that kind of truth that's going to manifest.
There would probably be a period at the period of transition where there would be a certain kind of way in which we could talk to the system or the people responsible for the old accounting systems, or the space in which they perceive of their activity, in manners that they are going to be able to understand. And I don't know, I have just found that interesting myself. It seems to me to make a certain sense that if we're not going to be able to distribute our productive capability in the old way, it is incumbent upon us who are interested in changing that to have an alternate system that can be presented to those that are responsible for that old way, again keeping in mind that they will be able to go along with it. And it seems to me that this system does make some sense in that regard, in that period of transition. but I don't know.
I would think Kelso is a brilliant man.
Yeah, well, he's
and I think all these things
poet.
are part of this educational process we're going through. And nature has gestation rates, and you can't make human babies in less than that 9 months, or whatever it may be.
That's right.
And she has a rate at which the biggest take the longest. To make man a success on our planet and get on a new, cross a new threshold, a new functioning universe is a very big undertaking. So that there's going to be a lot of the kind of talk you and I are having here, and there is all around the world. But I see, mostly we went through a period of great dismay, realizing the older things were not working. But now there's much more earnest inquiry about how do you make it work. And personally, I'm absolutely, I think everybody has validity, but my own commitment is then to resolving problem solutions into what are called artifacts. Where the artifact speaks for itself rather than, as for instance, let's have a man who's left his family over here to get some food over here. While he's away, there's a great flash flood between himself and his family, coming from a great mountain lake up above him, and so there's a roaring torrent, and he can't get back to his family. And nature then washes a big pinnacle rock loose, and it falls across the chasm. He will use that bridge and not try to swim across the bottom. Same way I said, if I've built a bridge, the bridge speaks for itself, and I don't have to have any words to explain the bridge. In other words, my whole commitment is to artifacts that tell man that this is the logical way to carry on, and we'll get on better.
I can understand that very clearly. It's beautiful. You were speaking before of the. I wonder if we might even be able to speak about the context within we're operating now. We're taping a television program that to be carried by a cable television system in New York City. And that cable television system is, or the cable television system that is a national entity, is a television system which is about to be linked. There are islands of cable vision capability around the country. Perhaps 10% of the nation now is able to receive cable, and cable is able to carry an unlimited, virtually unlimited carrying capacity as opposed to the bandwidth limitations of broadcast television. Speaking now in terms of the means by which general citizenry can begin to participate in the consciousness-raising educative process, that the cablevision systems are about to be united through satellite technology into a communication system, which one other component of which is the magnetic bubble memory storage system that the IBM Computer Corporation has just developed, is beginning to develop a communication system that is one that could be, as I see the system of Lewis Kelso, an economic system relating to a communication system that is truly one of abundance, as opposed to the strictly the limitations of the broadcast system that we had inherited, which was a system of scarcity. And I wonder if you might comment on your idea, or whether or not the production of videotape documentaries where good information is structured could be put out over that system as a means of a broad-based general participation.
We know we can technically, and in doing so, here we are. But up to now, a broadcasting system is actually sending out to people, and there's no way they can reply.
Well, in the cable, if I may, the cable has a two-way capacity. They can come back and forth.
That's the big difference.
Yes.
Well, the cable, you can go back.
Yes, they can.
In other words, there's actually, it's a discrete hookup. That's why you can speak right back.
That's right.
Now, we had, as for instance, the United States Revolution occurred, and we have our first representation. The representatives from the 13 states had to go by horse or foot back to their state, and they saw a lot of people along the way, talked to them in all the villages and towns. They were able to bring back to their own constituents the single problem. At the time of the Jefferson cabinet, I think he said to his cabinet, this is not a joke, he said, we have not had a letter from our Ambassador Franklin in France this year. If we don't hear from him pretty soon, we better write him a letter.
That's right.
But you had maybe one letter from France a year. So you would go back to your constituents and tell them what everybody in Washington felt about the letter that came from France. And the people would tell you what they want. So the whole period of representation was predicated on going all the way home by foot and horse, coming all the way back and expressing yourself, having plenty of time to do that. It took several years to do that. Now, since that time, suddenly the telegraph is invented. So the news got to people, but they couldn't come back.
Yeah.
The news went out this way.
Yeah.
News began to broadcast.
Yeah.
People used to then have a one-to-one correspondence of action-reaction. They told this and they did this. So things were really very successful under those conditions. But now, between the times that they expressed themselves in a national election, they probably have had 100,000 informations, and they're not able to say anything. All they say, I don't like it, I do like it, just everything. And they can't give a discrete answer. Is now going to be possible with the cable television for people to express themselves regarding specific problems. We're going to be able to have, as with the parimutuel machine, we're going to have a continual running knowledge of what the total people are thinking about any given problem. And for the first time, you don't really need a representative trying to guess what it is or having to make surveys. He knows.
Yeah, but at the same time,
that's going to really make an extraordinarily great, this enormous acceleration in man's becoming successful on our planet.
And I think that perhaps that system, in order to be functioning maximally so that each of us can, that there is the need to have the best possible information available so that the people making decision-making processes involving participation in that they be making those decisions and thinking in terms of the best information that is available or can be made available to them. And if you might,
they will know what
I would think that this system is just now coming into being, and it would seem to me entirely appropriate that, as that system comes into being, that system of communication, of abundance, that a program that be intrinsic to the very leading edge of the creation of that system be one that includes the perceptions of our Buckminster Fuller.
This way the representative does not have to guess his way and get information every couple of years. He's going to get hourly, minute information exactly what the pulse of the majority do. If the majority want this and he acted that way, he's not going to then have to be a scapegoat because that's what the majority said.
There is the question.
This is going to change things politically very greatly. And furthermore, then if society finds they made a mistake, they can reverse their position today. They don't have to wait for 2 years to get another election. So that this becomes a steerable affair. So you can begin to get closer and closer in where you really want to go.
Yes, right. And so then you do sense yourself the idea that the cable, satellite, computer link-up is a very intrinsic or an important technological development.
I wrote a piece in 1940. I was a technical and science advisor to staff of Fortune at that time. I wrote a piece Henry Luce was quite upset about because he was worried about what he called a direct democracy. I proposed what he called telephone voting. Consulting the telephone company, I found would not really step up the frequency of use of telephones. We had daily voting. And I saw that unless we really had the two-way communication, what I call later on two-way TV, this again would be critical to whether man makes it on our planet or not. But I think your cable television is just exactly that, man.
It does have the capability of doing that. And then I wondered also if we could pick up on this, since we just have a few more minutes left, but pick up or think some about your perceptions of the means by which videotape documentaries that would be able to be fed into that cable vision system of distribution might be best produced. I know from your book, Education Automation, concerned with Edwardsville campus at Southern Illinois University, that you had conceived of the university structures as we have them as becoming, in large measure, a great many of them, becoming video production centers for the creation of videotape documentaries that could be fed into this cable system as a process. So they would be places to go to create videotape documentaries. That still makes good sense to me, and I'm wondering if it does to you, and ties in nicely with the cable as a system for distributing such documentaries.
I would make a prophecy that within 10 years, the only universities that are still operating around our world will be nothing but documentary studios. And all the people who are not really interested in how do you get the information to people, and they're not trying to monopolize it, how do I get the most beautiful, accurate, understandable, logical way. All those others will have been given then fellowships, and they will not be on the campus.
Or perhaps
they'll be off studying and getting ready possibly to come make their documentaries.
Or we could be, surely they could go out and get information, or they could have in a condition of a new kind of economic condition, there would be no reason for them to be constrained that they're going to have a job or something to be there. There'd be places for people to go who have information, who are interested in having that information structured to maximally benefit the population of the planet,
so that the specialized or special case experiences of some of our specialized professorship with very good minds could become the subject matter of a documentary.
No
it
question.
could be doctored up by visual effects and music. One thing I would like to say to that is
possibly clearer
diction,
than that
perhaps.
particular professor.
I would like to say that it would seem to me that for that to be operating maximally beneficially, that there be a process by which the intellectual integrity of the videotape documentary thus created, that the intellectual integrity be the responsibility of an individual, and that any doctoring up on the part of an artistic community, I think that should pass the final, that the professor say, that's okay with me before it be put out.
Indeed.
Because this process can, the intellectual integrity of the person creating the program is important. The doctoring up of that is going to be assigned, and that process should be approved of by the person who's principally responsible for the integrity of the information, because he understands it best.
When it gets
then
down
you
to
have a real process, a design
where
center.
this time for communication is for the sake of humanity, is making
Yes.
a success of itself,
Yes.
and not how to make money
Yes.
or how to make political
Yes.
advantage.
Yes.
When we really don't have this
Right.
ulterior motives.
Right.
And it's just here for that.
Yeah.
Then there's no question about it. The speaker
Yeah.
must really be the authority on
Yeah.
just exactly what he meant by that.
Right.
That particular little nuance. It must not be edited out by somebody who said, no, this is not saleable.
Probably the lesser conscious doing it anyway, the commercial world. Well, hopefully we're going to be able to transcend that. Certainly the perceptions that you've brought to the whole scenario of human evolution or evolution in the universe is absolutely extremely important. And I would like to, I'm sorry, we're running right out of time, but I'd like to thank you really very, very much for participating on Conversations. It's been an honor for you to be here, and I'd like to thank you for your many contributions to the betterment of the human
thank
family.
you for inviting me.
Not at all. My pleasure. It's the purpose of Conversations to access information relevant to an understanding of what's going on and a maximal participation in that conscious evolution in universe. And you're indispensable to that. So thank you once again for being and for doing what you have done and for being here on the program. And I wonder if I could say good evening now. Thank you very, very much for viewing Conversations, and tune in next week on Conversations for another enlightening conversation. There really is always good talk on Conversations.
Hope you may have enjoyed that. Tune in next time to Conversations, and we will be bringing ongoing programming to that. Hope you may have enjoyed that piece with Dr. Fuller, a majorly important person in terms of the evolution of universal consciousness. And we thank you, Nat Woods, and others that helped put this together, and we'll be coming back again tomorrow. Thank you for viewing.